The ice formation on my roof was the size of a refrigerator, and according to Barbara from the Homeowners Association, it was ruining the aesthetic appeal of Clearwater Springs, Minnesota. I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in late February when she handed me the violation notice, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her clipboard, as if that made her more authoritative. "You have 72 hours to remedy this situation, Graham," Barbara said, her voice carrying that particular tone of smugness that made me want to throw snowballs at her Mercedes. "The ice buildup is excessive and frankly dangerous. Someone could get hurt if it falls." I looked up at my roof, at the massive ice dam that had formed along the edge. It was Minnesota winter, for crying out loud. Every house on the block had some degree of ice buildup. Mine just happened to be more visible from the street. "Barbara, it's February. This is what happens when you have snow on a roof in sub-zero temperatures. I am not exactly controlling the weather here." She flipped through her papers with theatrical precision. Section 7.4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that homeowners must maintain their properties in a manner that does not create hazards or eyesores. This qualifies as both. Eyesores. It's ice. It'll melt in a few weeks when spring comes. 72 hours, Graham. The fine starts at $200 per day if you are not in compliance. She turned on her expensive boots and walked back to her car, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that might as well have been a declaration of war. I went back inside, where my coffee was getting cold. My wife Rachel had left for her nursing shift at 6, so I had the house to myself. I pulled out my laptop and started researching ice dam removal. The cheapest quote I could find was $800 for something that would melt on its own in a matter of weeks. The thing about Clearwater Springs was that it sat in a natural basin. When the subdivision was built 15 years ago, the developers had constructed a series of retention walls and drainage systems to manage water flow. My property, along with 2 others, sat on the higher ground at the western edge of the development. During the spring melt or heavy rains, water naturally wanted to flow downhill, right through the main streets of the neighborhood. The original developers had been smart about it. They had built a series of berms and diversions on the 3 upper properties to channel water into a municipal drainage system that fed into a creek about a mile away. My property had the largest berm, a carefully constructed earthen dam that ran along my back property line. It was technically on my land, built with an easement agreement that I discovered when I purchased the house 5 years ago. The agreement stated that I was responsible for maintaining the berm, but that it served the community drainage plan. In exchange, the HOA had agreed to waive certain assessment fees. Except over the years, as board members changed, new people moved in, and memories faded, those waived fees had slowly crept back in. I was now paying the same HOA dues as everyone else, while maintaining a structure that protected their properties from flooding. I had brought this up at HOA meetings before. Barbara, who had been president for 3 years, always dismissed it with vague promises to look into the original agreements. Nothing ever came of it. Now she was fining me for ice on my roof. I spent that first day calling around, getting quotes, arguing with Rachel on the phone about whether this was worth fighting. She was practical, always had been. "Just pay someone to remove it, Graham. Pick your battles." But this felt like death by 1,000 cuts. It was never just one thing with the HOA. Last year it had been the color of my mailbox, which was apparently half a shade too dark according to the approved palette. Before that, my lawn was 1 inch too tall during a week when I had been out of town for work. Every violation came with a fine. Every fine came with Barbara's condescending smile. On day 2, I received a follow-up email from the HOA with photos of my roof taken from various angles. They had apparently sent someone to document the violation, as if I might somehow remove the ice and then claim it had never existed. The email reminded me that I now had 48 hours remaining. I was sitting at my kitchen table, looking at those photos, when something clicked. I pulled out the original property documents, the ones from when we had purchased the house. There it was, in the easement agreement for the berm. The language was clear. In exchange for maintaining the drainage structure, certain fees and assessments could be waived at the discretion of the homeowner if they felt the HOA was not upholding their end of the agreement. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. The berm was on my property. The easement gave the HOA the right to maintain the drainage function, but it also gave me the right to revoke that easement if I provided 90 days' notice and could demonstrate that the HOA had violated the terms of our agreement. The next morning, I woke up early and printed out every violation notice I had received over the past 3 years. There were 14 of them. I had paid every fine, attended meetings to contest them, followed every arbitrary rule they had thrown at me. I compiled them into a folder along with copies of my HOA payment history, showing that I was indeed paying full fees despite the original agreement. Then I drafted a letter. It was professional, polite, and absolutely clear. I was providing notice of my intent to revoke the drainage easement in 90 days, unless the HOA immediately ceased all violation proceedings against me, and refunded the cumulative fines I had paid over the past 3 years. I also requested a formal review of my HOA fee structure to bring it in line with the original agreement. I sent it via certified mail to Barbara and every member of the HOA board. I also sent a copy to the city planning office, just to create a paper trail. The response came faster than I expected. Barbara called me that same afternoon, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Graham, what exactly do you think you are doing?" "I am exercising my rights as a property owner, Barbara. That berm on my land prevents your street from turning into a river every spring. I have been maintaining it out of my own pocket while paying full HOA fees and dealing with petty violation notices. I am done. You cannot just remove a drainage structure. There are laws." "I am not removing anything. I am revoking an easement that I have every legal right to revoke. The structure will remain. It just will not be functioning as part of the community drainage plan anymore. You will need to figure out your own solution for managing water flow." There was silence on the other end. Then, "We will sue you." "You are welcome to try. I will see you at the next HOA meeting." She hung up. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but also something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or just the relief of finally pushing back. Rachel came home that evening to find me surrounded by documents, reviewing property surveys and drainage maps I had requested from the county. She looked exhausted from her 12-hour shift, but she sat down across from me anyway. "Tell me you did not do something crazy," she said. I explained everything: the easement, the letter, the phone call from Barbara. Rachel listened, her expression cycling through concern, disbelief, and finally something that might have been approval. "So you are going to flood the neighborhood?" "I am not going to flood anything. I am going to remove a dam on my property that I have no legal obligation to maintain. What happens after that is the HOA's problem. They should have thought about that before nickel and diming me for 3 years. This is going to get ugly, Graham. It already is ugly. I am just changing the terms." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, but Barbara called an emergency session for that Saturday. The email that went out to all residents was carefully worded, talking about a property owner who was threatening community safety by interfering with drainage infrastructure. My name was not mentioned, but in a neighborhood of 60 homes, word traveled fast. I started getting text messages and calls from neighbors. Some were angry, having heard a twisted version of events from Barbara. Others were curious, asking what was really going on. I explained the situation to anyone who would listen. Most people had no idea about the berm or the easement. They just knew that water flowed downhill and had never thought about what stopped it from flowing through their yards. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of the subdivision. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. Apparently, everyone wanted to see this showdown. Inside, the room was packed. Barbara sat at the front table with 4 other board members. I recognized them all. Tom Henderson, the treasurer, who had once threatened to fine me because my Christmas lights stayed up until January 2nd. Lisa Morrison, who had cited me for having a trash can visible from the street on a non-collection day. The other 2, Mark Chen and Patricia Wolf, I had less history with. Barbara called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We are here to discuss a serious matter affecting community safety. Brennan has threatened to interfere with critical drainage infrastructure in a manner that could cause significant property damage to multiple homes. She said my name like it was a curse. Several heads turned to look at me. I kept my expression neutral. I would like Graham to explain to this community why he feels it is appropriate to hold us hostage over a petty dispute about a violation notice. So that was how she was playing it. I stood up, holding my folder of documents. I am happy to explain. When this neighborhood was developed, the builders needed to solve a drainage problem. Water naturally flows from the higher elevation at the western edge down through the lower streets. To prevent flooding, they built a series of berms and diversions. The largest of these is on my property. I pulled out the survey maps and held them up so people could see, though most would not be able to read them from their seats. In exchange for maintaining this structure, the original homeowners at my address were given a reduction in HOA fees. That agreement was documented in an easement. However, over the years, my fees have been increased to match everyone else's. I am now paying full price while maintaining infrastructure that protects this community. We all maintain our properties, Barbara interrupted. That is what HOA fees are for. This is not regular property maintenance. This is a flood control structure. Without it, the spring melt and storm water flow directly down Maple Street and Oak Avenue. I have been subsidizing the community's drainage needs while simultaneously being fined for trivial violations. So I sent notice that I intend to revoke the easement. The room erupted in conversation. Barbara banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. This is ridiculous, Graham. You cannot just revoke an easement. That structure is part of the community plan. I absolutely can revoke it. I had a real estate attorney review the documents. The easement includes specific language that allows me to terminate it with proper notice if the HOA is not upholding the agreement. You have been charging me full fees while ignoring the original terms. That is a material breach. Tom Henderson leaned forward. Even if that is true, removing that berm could cause thousands of dollars in damage. You would be liable. I am not removing anything. The berm will stay exactly where it is. I am simply removing the drainage channels and filling in the gaps that allow water to flow into the municipal system. The water will naturally flow around the berm, which means it will go where it wants to go. Probably down the streets, like it did before the neighborhood was built. Patricia Wolf, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Is there a way to resolve this without lawyers? Graham, what would it take for you to maintain the current setup? Finally, a reasonable question. I want 3 things. First, no more petty violation notices. The ice dam on my roof is going to melt on its own. Stop manufacturing problems. Second, refund the fines I have paid over the past 3 years. I have documentation of everyone. They total $3,200. Third, adjust my HOA fees to reflect the original agreement, or alternatively, have the HOA take over maintenance of the berm. Barbara's face was red. We cannot set a precedent where homeowners just opt out of rules they do not like. If we waive his fees, everyone will want special treatment. Then take over the berm maintenance, I said. I am not asking for something unreasonable. I am asking for the agreement that was in place when I bought this house. The structure is on your property. That makes it your responsibility, not according to the easement agreement. Would you like me to read the relevant sections out loud? The meeting devolved into arguments between board members, with neighbors chiming in from the audience. Some supported me, particularly those who had their own grievances with Barbara's leadership. Others worried about flooding and property values. It was chaos. Eventually, Barbara called for a recess. The board members huddled in a corner while the rest of us waited. I could see them arguing, pointing at documents, checking their phones. After 20 minutes, they returned to their seats. "We need time to consult with our attorney," Barbara said, her voice clipped. "This meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. "I am not stopping the 90-day clock," I said. "My notice has been filed. If you want to negotiate, you have until May 15th. I walked out of the clubhouse into the cold February night. Several neighbors stopped me in the parking lot. A few thanked me for standing up to Barbara. Others warned me that I was making a mistake, that the HOA would bury me in legal fees. I listened politely and went home. Rachel was waiting up. How bad was it? About what I expected. Barbara tried to make me look like a villain. Some people bought it, others did not. Do you really think they will let you revoke that easement? I do not think they have a choice. The agreement is clear. But I am guessing they will try to fight it anyway. I was right. The HOA's attorney sent me a letter the following Wednesday, asserting that the easement was permanent and that any attempt to interfere with the drainage system would result in immediate legal action. The letter was full of threatening language and vague references to statutes that supposedly supported their position. I forwarded it to my own attorney, a real estate specialist named David Park, who I had consulted before sending my original notice. He reviewed it and called me that afternoon. "This is mostly bluster," David said. "Their attorney is trying to intimidate you. The easement agreement is unusual, but it is also very clear. You have the right to terminate it with proper notice. The question is what happens to the drainage system after that." "What do you mean?" "If removing those channels causes flooding on other properties, you could potentially be liable for damages. It is a gray area. You are not doing anything illegal by revoking the easement, but if your actions directly cause harm to others, they could sue. So I am damned if I do, damned if I do not." "Not necessarily. Here is what I suggest. Document everything. Take photos and videos of the current system. Get an engineer to assess it. If we can show that you are simply returning the property to its natural state, and that the HOA was responsible for managing community drainage, you will be in a stronger position." I hired a civil engineer named Robert Chen the next day. He came out to survey my property, examining the berm and the drainage channels that had been cut through it. He took measurements, soil samples, and detailed photographs. His report was ready in a week. The summary was fascinating. The berm was indeed on my property, constructed as part of the original subdivision development. The drainage channels through it were sophisticated, with culverts and grading designed to manage significant water flow. Maintaining them properly required periodic inspection and occasional repairs. Robert estimated the annual maintenance cost at around $1,500, not counting major repairs if the structure was damaged. More importantly, his analysis showed that without the managed drainage, water would naturally flow around the berm and follow the street grades down into the lower sections of the neighborhood. During spring melt or heavy rains, this could result in significant flooding of streets and potentially some yards. However, the natural terrain would likely keep water on the streets rather than flowing directly into homes, assuming the storm drains along those streets were functioning properly. That last part was key. The neighborhood had storm drains along all the main roads. They were maintained by the city, not the HOA. If those drains were working, they should be able to handle the water flow, though it might be more volume than they typically managed. I shared Robert's report with David, who loved it. "This is perfect. It shows that you were maintaining a complex system at significant personal cost. It also shows that the community has municipal drainage infrastructure that should handle the runoff. You are not creating a hazard. You are just choosing to stop subsidizing a private solution when a public one exists." Armed with this information, I sent another letter to the HOA board. This one included a copy of Robert's engineering report and a detailed breakdown of my maintenance costs over the past 5 years. I also included photos of the current system, documenting exactly what I was maintaining. The letter made a final offer. Either the HOA could agree to my terms, reducing my fees and ceasing violation notices, or they could take over maintenance of the drainage system themselves. I even offered to sell them the easement outright for $10,000, which was less than the cost of the maintenance I had performed. If they did none of these things, I would proceed with filling in the drainage channels and returning my property to its natural state exactly 90 days from my original notice. I was not threatening anyone. I was simply informing them of my intentions. March arrived with more snow. The ice dam on my roof remained, now larger due to another storm that had dumped 8 inches on Minneapolis. I received another violation notice from the HOA, this one increasing the daily fine to $300. I did not pay it. Instead, I documented it and added it to my file. The neighborhood was divided. Some people understood my position and were angry at Barbara for creating this situation. Others saw me as selfish, willing to risk community property for my own benefit. There were arguments on the neighborhood's social media pages, with people taking sides and making accusations. Barbara escalated. She sent a neighborhood-wide email claiming that I was refusing to maintain a safety structure and that all residents should be aware of the potential danger. She stopped short of directly calling me negligent, but the implication was clear. I responded with my own email, attaching the original easement agreement and explaining the full history of the situation. I included the engineering report summary and my various offers to resolve the dispute. Several people replied thanking me for the transparency. Others accused me of making excuses. The HOA's attorney sent another letter, this one threatening an injunction to prevent me from altering the drainage system. David advised me that they would have a hard time getting such an injunction since I was simply exercising my property rights, but that they might try anyway just to delay things. April brought warmer temperatures. The ice dam on my roof began to melt, dripping water that froze again at night, creating long icicles. I received no fewer than 7 emails from Barbara documenting this new hazard. I ignored them all. My 90-day deadline was May 15th. As that date approached, the HOA board finally called another meeting. This one was designated as a negotiation session, with only board members and me invited. David advised me to bring him along, so we showed up together at the clubhouse on a Tuesday evening in late April. Barbara was there with the full board and their attorney, a stern-looking woman named Jennifer Walsh. We sat across from each other at a conference table, and the atmosphere was tense. Jennifer spoke first. "Mr. Brennan, my clients are prepared to offer a compromise. They will reduce your violation fines by 50% and agree to a temporary reduction in your HOA fees while we work out a long-term maintenance plan for the drainage system." David shook his head before I could respond. "That is not a compromise. That is asking my client to continue paying for something he has no obligation to maintain, while getting a token discount on punitive fines that should never have been issued in the first place. The alternative is litigation that will cost everyone involved far more than these fees," Jennifer said. "Maybe," David replied. "Or maybe we go to court, the judge reads the easement agreement and we win. Then your clients are still stuck with a drainage problem, except now they have also paid legal fees and look foolish." Barbara could not contain herself any longer. "This is extortion. You are threatening the entire community over petty grievances." I had been quiet, but that pushed me to speak. "Barbara, I have lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. In that time, you have fined me 14 times for things like my grass being 1 inch too tall and my mailbox being the wrong shade of gray. You have made my life miserable over nonsense while I maintained a drainage system that protects your property. This is not extortion. This is me deciding I am done being treated like a problem when I have been doing you a favor. You bought the property with that easement in place. You knew what you were getting into. I bought the property with an easement that included fee reductions. You changed the terms without my agreement. That is breach of contract." Tom Henderson, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "What exactly would it cost to have the HOA take over maintenance of the system?" Robert had included that estimate in his report. "About $1,500 annually for routine maintenance. Maybe $3,000 every few years if major repairs are needed. You could assess every homeowner in the neighborhood an extra $25 a year and cover it easily. Or we could just let you handle it and waive some fees," Tom said, looking at Barbara. "We cannot set that precedent," Barbara insisted. "Why not?" Patricia Wolf asked. "He is providing a service that benefits all of us. A $25 annual fee increase will make people furious. Waiving his fees costs us nothing in real terms, and it is what was originally agreed to." Lisa Morrison nodded. "I have to agree. This has gotten out of hand. Graham, if we refund your fines and reduce your fees back to the original agreement terms, will you maintain the current drainage setup?" I looked at David, who gave a small nod. "Yes. But I want it in writing, signed by every board member, and I want assurance that violation notices for normal property conditions stop. I am not asking to ignore legitimate problems. If my yard becomes a jungle or I start parking cars on the lawn, fine me. But no more notices about ice in winter or grass that is barely over the limit." Barbara looked like she had swallowed a lemon, but she was outnumbered. Tom, Patricia, and Lisa were clearly ready to end this dispute. Even Mark Chen, who had been silent, was nodding. Jennifer Walsh pulled out a legal pad and started drafting language. We spent the next hour hammering out the details. The agreement would restore my original fee structure, saving me about $800 annually. The HOA would refund the $3,200 in fines I had paid over the past 3 years. In exchange, I would continue maintaining the drainage system and would not revoke the easement. There was also new language about violations. Going forward, Any violation notice had to be for a clear breach of written HOA rules, not subjective judgments about aesthetics. A photo had to be included, and I would have 30 days to remedy the issue before any fine was assessed. By 9 that evening, we had a draft agreement. Jennifer said she would have a final version prepared within a week for everyone to sign. Barbara said nothing during the final handshakes. She collected her papers and left immediately, her heels clicking on the tile floor. The other board members seemed relieved, chatting with David and me about next steps and expressing hope that we could all move forward. I walked out into the spring evening feeling lighter than I had in months. Rachel was waiting up when I got home, and I told her everything. "So you won," she said. "I guess so. Or we all won. The neighborhood keeps its drainage, I stop getting harassed, and everyone saves money compared to a legal fight. Do you think Barbara will honor it? She does not have a choice. The other board members are on record supporting this. If she tries anything, they will overrule her." The agreement was finalized and signed the first week of May. The HOA treasurer cut me a check for $3,200, and my monthly fee was reduced by $67 starting in June. More importantly, I got something that felt like respect, or at least acknowledgement that I was not just another homeowner to be pushed around. The ice on my roof had long since melted. Spring came fully to Minnesota, bringing rain and the beginning of mosquito season. The berm on my property continued doing its job, channeling water away from the streets below. I inspected it after heavy rains, clearing debris and checking the culverts, just as I had been doing for years. The neighborhood returned to normal, or whatever normal was for a group of people forced to live under the peculiar tyranny of a homeowners association. People mowed their lawns, walked their dogs, and complained about property taxes. The social media drama faded as new controversies emerged. Barbara remained as HOA president, but her power was diminished. Other board members were more willing to question her decisions, and homeowners felt emboldened to push back on petty violations. There was talk of not re-electing her when her term came up the following year. Summer arrived with its humid heat and evening thunderstorms. I spent weekends on my deck, watching those storms roll across the prairie and dump rain on Clearwater Springs. The water flowed down the streets in rivers, then disappeared into storm drains and the channels I maintained. The system worked exactly as designed, protecting homes and families from flooding. One evening in July, Patricia Wolf from the HOA board stopped by my house. She was walking her golden retriever and saw me outside watering my garden. "Graham, I wanted to thank you," she said. The situation with Barbara had been getting worse for a while. A lot of us on the board felt she was too aggressive with violations, but no one wanted to be the one to challenge her. What you did forced us all to look at how the HOA was actually operating. I was not trying to start a revolution. I just wanted to be left alone, she laughed. Sometimes that is all it takes. Anyway, we are working on revising the bylaws to make the violation process more fair. Your case made it clear we needed better guidelines. After she left, I thought about what she had said. I had not intended to change anything beyond my own situation. I had just been tired of being nickel and dimed, tired of Barbara's condescending attitude, tired of maintaining something for free while being treated like a problem. But in pushing back, I had apparently started something larger. Other homeowners had begun questioning violations. Board meetings had better attendance. People were reading the bylaws and asking why certain rules existed. Maybe that was the real lesson. Systems like HOAs only have the power people give them. For years, everyone had just paid their fines and followed the arbitrary rules because it seemed easier than fighting. But the moment someone stood up and said no, With evidence and determination, the whole power structure shifted. Rachel got home from work that evening and found me still thinking about it. We sat on the deck with cold beers, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "You are being philosophical," she said, "just thinking about how this all turned out. 6 months ago, I was ready to tear down that berm out of spite. Now I am maintaining it by choice, on my terms. That is probably the difference. Choice." She was right. I was doing the exact same work, but it felt completely different because I had agency in the arrangement. I had fought for terms that were fair, and I had won. August brought more storms and more opportunities to watch the drainage system do its job. One particularly heavy rainfall flooded several neighborhoods in Minneapolis, but Clearwater Springs stayed dry. The local news showed images of cars stranded in high water, basements flooded, streets turned into streams. We had none of that. A few neighbors mentioned it to me afterward, acknowledging the system and by extension my role in maintaining it. Word had gotten around about the dispute and the resolution. People understood now what that berm was preventing. September came with cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color. Barbara's term as HOA president was set to expire in November, and Patricia Wolf announced she would run to replace her. Several other homeowners, including myself, planned to vote for her. Barbara did not run for re-election. At the October meeting, she announced she and her husband were moving to Arizona. She made it sound like a voluntary decision based on his retirement, but several people told me later she had been increasingly isolated on the board. The other members had started overruling her decisions, particularly regarding violations. She could not wield the petty authority she had enjoyed, so she was leaving. Part of me felt bad about that, but a larger part did not. Barbara had made life difficult for a lot of people over the years, always hiding behind the HOA rules as if they were holy scripture. She never seemed to grasp that the rules were supposed to serve the community, not the other way around. Patricia won the election for HOA president in November. One of her first acts was implementing the new violation guidelines the board had developed. They included clear standards, mandatory photographic evidence, reasonable timelines for fixes, and a 3-member review before any fine could be assessed. It was not perfect, but it was far better than the system Barbara had run. Winter came back around, bringing snow and cold. Ice formed on roofs throughout the neighborhood, including mine. This time, no one said anything. It was just ice, a natural part of Minnesota winter, not worth the paperwork or conflict. I maintained the berm through another freeze-thaw cycle, checking the culverts and making sure everything was ready for spring melt. The work was familiar now, almost meditative. I understood the system intimately, knew every slope and channel, every place where debris might accumulate. In December, I received an unexpected letter from the city planning office. They were conducting a review of subdivision drainage systems in response to recent flooding in other areas. An inspector wanted to come examine the setup at Clearwater Springs as an example of private infrastructure that was working well. The inspector, a civil engineer named Michelle Torres, came out in January. I walked her through the entire system, explaining how the original developers had designed it and how I maintained it. She took notes and photos, asked detailed questions about seasonal challenges and maintenance costs. "This is impressive," she said. "Most subdivisions rely entirely on municipal systems or have inadequate private solutions that fail after a few years. This is well designed and well maintained." I had some motivation to figure it out, I said, then explained the whole saga with the HOA. Michelle laughed. "That is usually how it goes. Nobody pays attention to infrastructure until something breaks or someone gets mad. But seriously, this should be a model for other developments. Mind if I include this in my report? Go ahead. Maybe it will help someone else avoid flooding. She left, and I felt oddly proud. I had started this whole thing out of frustration and spite, but somewhere along the way it had become something else. I had learned skills, understood systems, taken responsibility for something important. The fact that the city now saw it as a positive example felt like validation. Spring arrived again, my second since the dispute began. The snow melted, filling the drainage channels with rushing water. I watched it flow through the culverts and away from the neighborhood streets, just as designed. No flooding, no problems, just a system working exactly as it should. Rachel and I celebrated our anniversary in April with a dinner at our favorite restaurant in downtown Minneapolis. Over wine and steaks, we talked about the past year and everything that had happened. You regret any of it? She asked. I thought about it. The stress, the conflict, the uncertainty of not knowing if I was making a huge mistake. Then I thought about the agreement we had reached, the changes in the HOA, the respect I had earned from neighbors, and my own understanding of what I was capable of when pushed. No, I said. I wish it had not been necessary, but I do not regret standing up for myself. Good. Because you were kind of magnificent, angry, stubborn, and slightly crazy, but magnificent. We laughed about that, about how close I had come to actually filling in those drainage channels just to make a point. It would have been catastrophic, flooding streets, and causing exactly the kind of property damage everyone had feared. But it would have been legal, and that was the leverage I had needed. The fact that I had not had to follow through, that reason had eventually prevailed, was probably the best outcome. I had proven my point without actually harming anyone. The threat had been enough. Summer rolled around again with its heat and storms. The garden I had planted flourished, tomatoes and peppers growing in the raised beds I had built. I spent evenings outside, working in the soil and watching the sky for weather. The neighborhood had changed in subtle ways. People seemed friendlier, more willing to talk and help each other. The oppressive atmosphere that Barbara had created was gone. Patricia ran the HOA with a lighter touch, focusing on actual problems rather than manufactured ones. One July evening, I was inspecting the berm after a heavy rain when Tom Henderson walked over from his house on the street below. He was carrying 2 beers and offered me one. I never properly thanked you, he said, for dealing with all of that drama with the drainage system. I know I was not helpful during those meetings. You were the treasurer. You had to be careful. Maybe. But I could have stood up to Barbara sooner. A lot of us could have. We let her run things her way because it was easier than confronting her. We stood there looking at the berm, at the water still trickling through the channels. The system was handling the runoff perfectly, protecting his house and dozens of others from potential flooding. For what it is worth, I am glad you fought back, Tom said. This neighborhood needed someone to shake things up. After he left, I finished my inspection and walked back to my house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful in the way Minnesota summer evenings often are, the kind of moment that makes you forget about the brutal winters. I thought about what Tom had said, about shaking things up. I had not set out to be any kind of hero or reformer. I had just been a guy who was tired of being pushed around, who happened to have leverage in the form of a drainage system. But sometimes that is all it takes. One person saying no, one person standing their ground, one person willing to accept the consequences of disrupting the status quo. It does not have to be dramatic or revolutionary. Sometimes it is just refusing to pay a fine for ice on your roof. Fall came again with its familiar rhythm of cooling temperatures and changing leaves. I prepared the drainage system for winter, clearing the channels of fallen leaves and checking the structural integrity of the berm. Everything was in good shape, ready for another season. Patricia stopped by one afternoon while I was working. She had her clipboard, but this time it was not a violation notice. "The HOA board wanted me to give you this," she said, handing me a letter. It was a formal thank you, signed by all 5 board members, acknowledging my maintenance of the drainage system and expressing appreciation for my service to the community. It was not something I had expected or even wanted, but it felt good to receive. "We are also going to put up a small plaque by the entrance," Patricia said, "acknowledging the homes that maintain critical infrastructure. Yours will be listed first. That is not necessary. Maybe not, but it is right. You do something important here and people should know about it." After she left, I read the letter again. It occurred to me that this was what I had really been fighting for all along. Not reduced fees or refunded fines, though those mattered. What I had wanted was simple recognition that I was contributing something valuable, that I deserved to be treated with respect rather than suspicion. Winter settled in once more. Snow covered the berm, hiding the channels and culverts until spring would reveal them again. Ice formed on roofs throughout the neighborhood, including mine. It was just ice, natural and temporary, not worth anyone's concern. I sat in my warm house, drinking coffee and watching snow fall outside. Rachel was working a day shift and I had the place to myself. The house was quiet except for the furnace cycling on and off. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. The violations, the fines, the dispute, the resolution, and the aftermath. It had been exhausting and stressful, but also weirdly rewarding. I had learned things about property law, civil engineering, and community politics that I never expected to know. More than that, I had learned something about myself. That I could stand up to pressure, that I could fight for what was right, that I could win when the odds seemed against me. Those were lessons worth having, even if the price had been months of conflict and anxiety. The HOA still existed, still had rules, still sent out occasional violation notices for legitimate issues. But it was different now, more reasonable, more focused on actual problems rather than petty tyranny. That shift had not happened because of some grand campaign or organized resistance. It had happened because one person refused to accept business as usual. I finished my coffee and got ready for the day. There were errands to run, bills to pay, all the ordinary tasks of an ordinary life. The drama was over, replaced by routine. That was fine with me. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, where life just goes back to normal but on better terms. No flood, no revenge, no dramatic confrontation. Just a man maintaining a berm on his property, protecting his neighbors from water they would never see, respected for doing something important. That was enough. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall. Each year I maintained the drainage system. Each year the neighborhood stayed dry. It became a point of pride, something I was known for. The guy who keeps the water away. The guy who stood up to the HOA and won. Children grew up in those houses protected from flooding. Families had barbecues and birthday parties in yards that stayed dry because of channels I maintained. People bought houses in Clearwater Springs partly because it had never had flooding problems, not knowing the specific reason why. That was fine. I did not need recognition beyond what I had. I just needed to be left alone to do my work, to live my life, to enjoy my house and property on fair terms. Sometimes, I wondered what would have happened if I had actually gone through with it. if I had filled in those channels and let nature take its course. The flooding would have been spectacular, no question. Streets turned into rivers, yards into ponds, basements filled with water. The HOA would have been helpless to stop it, at least initially. By the time they got a court order, the damage would have been done. But I would have been the villain in that story, the angry homeowner who hurt innocent people to make a point. That was not who I wanted to be. Standing up for myself was one thing. Causing actual harm was another. So I had made the right choice, using leverage to negotiate rather than to destroy. The outcome was better for everyone involved. The neighborhood stayed dry. I got fair treatment and we all moved forward. As I write this now, 3 years after that first violation notice about ice on my roof, life is good. Rachel and I are happy in our home. The HOA functions reasonably under Patricia's leadership. The drainage system works perfectly, a silent guardian against flooding that most people never think about. And Barbara. She is in Arizona, probably terrorizing some new homeowners association with complaints about desert landscaping or house paint colors. That is her nature, and I no longer spend energy being angry about it. She was just a person who found meaning in petty authority, unable to see the bigger picture. The real story is not about her, though. It is about systems and power, about when to compromise and when to fight, about knowing your worth and demanding fair treatment. It is about leverage and negotiation, about standing your ground without losing your humanity. It is about ice on a roof and a dam that kept streets from flooding, and a man who decided he was done being pushed around. That is my story, start to finish. No great drama, no villain arrested, no comeuppance beyond a woman leaving for Arizona and a neighborhood learning to function better. Just ordinary people working through conflict and finding a resolution that let everyone move forward. The berm still stands on my property, earth and stone shaped by engineers and maintained by my hands. Water still flows through its channels, directed and controlled, keeping chaos at bay. It is not glamorous work, but it matters. And that, in the end, is enough.